Hi, welcome back. In this unit, we're looking at aggregate supply, aggregate demand. We're taking things from other macroeconomic units or videos and combining them into a single model. So this is the first in that series. I start with this because I think this curve is the easiest one to begin with. But by the end of this, we should have at least 3 separate videos, if not more, walking us through each of the 3 curves and then talking about how changes in our economy can be reflected in this model. So with this model, we're going to begin with our 2 axes. And that is not a very straight line there, but sorry about that. Our vertical axis is going to measure the price level. All right, so this is not the same as like apples and the price of apples, and the price of apples is $1.99 a pound. This is the price level in our economy. It's essentially that CPI number, if you will, if you remember from an earlier chapter, the cost of the basket of the current year divided by the cost of the basket in the base year. That number itself is not really what people are interested in, but rather how that number changes. So as we're moving up that line, it tells us we have inflation. As we move down that line or that axis, it tells us we have deflation. So again, the absolute number, not as relevant or not as important as where we're headed. So we will get to changes in that later. The horizontal axis is measuring real GDP. Remember that one as well from Unit 1. This is the amount that we're producing, right? This is the actual, the value of the items we're producing already having been adjusted for inflation. So that's the base of our model, and those are our 2 axes. So the first curve that we're going to talk about is the long run aggregate supply. So the long run aggregate supply is essentially measuring our potential GDP. So if you think back to the last set of videos with the production possibility frontier, we talked about being on the curve as being efficient. This means that you are using all of your resources wisely. Everything is essentially being used or employed the way that you would expect it. The only thing I do want to mention as a little caveat is to say that we're at potential does not mean that we have 0% unemployment. It does not mean that everybody is working. It means that we have an unemployment rate equal to what we referred to as the natural rate of unemployment. We saw that again in Unit 1. All right, so for us in the United States right now, that's say 3.5%. So we can still be at our potential with an unemployment rate that's, in the low to mid 3s. When we draw the long run aggregate supply line, it is going to be completely vertical, straight up and down. A little crooked at the bottom there, but you get the idea. It is a completely vertical curve. And the reason why it's vertical is because the long run aggregate supply is independent of the price level. What does that mean? Well, think about what it's measuring again. It's measuring our potential GDP, or our potential real GDP. It's measuring how much we can produce, and that's separate for how much things sell for, right? The prices of goods. This is just saying if we use all our factories and we use, 97% of our labor force and we use our natural resources wisely, here's where we can produce. It doesn't matter what this sells for. The fact that that long run aggregate supply is a vertical and it's independent of the price level is also going to lead to another assumption or another statement, and that is along the long run aggregate supply curve, real wages are constant. Let's talk about this for a minute and what that means. I'm going to scroll down, get the graph off so I can focus on this. So what are real wages? Real wages represent your purchasing power. So if I said, for example, that you make $10 an hour and you could go buy a burger for $5, it basically means that in every hour you're able to purchase 2 burgers for lunch. If the price of burgers went up, in order to hold your real wage constant, then your wage that you're paid would also have to go up. So if burgers went up to, say, $6 each, right, you would need to earn $12 in order to be just as well off, right? Still able to purchase 2 burgers for every hour you work. There's an equation for this, and it's that your real wages equal your nominal wages divided by the price level. Technically, there's probably a times 100 hanging off on the end, but it's not really relevant to me and what we're doing because we're not solving for that real wage. I want you guys to get this intuitively. What I am saying here is that on that long run curve, we are holding real wages constant. Right? Now, just because the long run aggregate supply is independent of the price level, that doesn't mean the price level can't change. It just means that the value of potential GDP doesn't change. So if the price level goes up, for example, and real wages are held constant, that means that nominal wages will go up by the same percentage. Nominal wages, if you don't remember that term or the difference between nominal and real, nominal is the value in your paycheck. All right, so nominal is that literally the dollar amount that you make. So nominal is the amount on your paycheck. Real is what you can actually afford to buy with that paycheck given the current price level. So in order to hold real wages constant, if price level changes, nominal wages have to change by the same percentage. So kind of those assumptions there, holding the real wage constant, that we're using all of our available resources, that we're producing at our potential, that gives us our current long run aggregate supply at any given point in time. Last thing for this video, can this line shift, right? Can it increase or decrease? And I'll tell you just real quickly here on the graph, increases move to the right, and decreases move to the left. But I'm going to scroll back down to list out kind of some of what would increase or decrease. So in order for long run aggregate supply to change, what must change? Your potential. Okay, so for long run aggregate supply to change, it must be the case that your potential changes. So what will change that potential? Lots of things. If we're thinking about increasing our potential, increases could be caused by investment. I'm going to only give you a short list here because I'll give you a broader statement in a second. Investment, building new factories, right? Then our potential increases. Infrastructure, improving our roads to move things, infrastructure, I don't know what I was writing right there. Improving our roads, improving airports, train systems, things like that to move goods and people around faster. You could talk about technology, obviously, is a big factor that leads to growth. So investment, infrastructure, technology, education, population growth, all of these things and so many more. Basically, all of the factors that we talked about in Unit 2 related to growth could increase the long run aggregate supply. What could decrease the long run aggregate supply? Things like war, famine, natural disasters, anything that could shift in that production possibility frontier has the potential of decreasing that long run aggregate supply curve. But just going back up to it to recap one more time, make sure it's clear. Your long run aggregate supply curve is perfectly vertical. Mine gets a little wobbly at the end, but it's perfectly straight up and down. What does that mean? It means you've got the same value for any given price level. Your potential GDP stays the same regardless of the price level. It is independent of the price level. Make sure you understand that in all the different ways you could say the same thing, right? Potential doesn't change with price. It's independent of price. Those mean the same thing. Make sure you know that along the long run aggregate supply curve that real wages are constant, right? So in the long run, if a teacher makes half as much as a doctor, then even if there's inflation and all these things change in the economy, that in the long run, a teacher is expected to still make half as much as a doctor, according to this theory. And then make sure you understand what could increase the long run, right? So good things like investment, infrastructure, education, population, technology, potential trade agreements, right? Lots of things. Adaptation of democracy, right? Property rights, all these things could increase your long-run potential, and what could decrease it? Anything that's going to hurt countries or societies. So things like war, famine, natural disasters, where you lose either people or facilities or land. So that's your long run. I'll be making more videos to follow up with shortly. Hope to see you in the next one. As always, let me know if you have any questions.